Hi everyone, it's James from the Fit RV, and in this video, which is the second one in the RV Basics series, we're going to chat about the freshwater plumbing system in your RV. So just like the last video about RV electrical, and I'll put up a link to that one now, when you're done watching this video, you should know the very basics of your RV's freshwater plumbing so you can get out there and enjoy a weekend of camping using your RV's freshwater system without being mystified or afraid. Now this video is sponsored by our friends at Winnebago RVs, so thank you to them for that. But the information we're going to cover is not Winnebago specific. It should be applicable to most motorized or towable RVs out there. So let's get started. Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you is to read your manual, which, let's face it, is not very exciting, but it is important. And it's important because the information I can give you in a video like this is going to be general in nature because I don't know what kind of rig you have. So I can tell you how RV plumbing generally works, but I don't know if your RV has a cool hot water recirculating valve or a different kind of gravity fill or what have you. But that information will be in your owner's manual, so that's why you should read it. I always do when getting into a new RV because oftentimes I don't know what I don't know. And final disclaimer, if I should mention something here and your manual says something different, well, then your owner's manual trumps video I found on the internet, so do read your owner's manual. Your RV's freshwater plumbing system is one of those things that really elevates RVing over something like tent camping. Being able to wash your hands, wash dishes, brush your teeth, flush the toilet, all of that without going outside, and doing that literally anywhere, it just takes the rough right out of roughing it. So, what are the things you absolutely need to know about your RV's freshwater system in order to enjoy that weekend of camping? Well, first you'll want to know how to fill your RV's freshwater tank. Next, you'll need to know how to turn on your RV's freshwater pump. You'll also want to know how to connect to campground water, should you have that available. You'll want to know how to turn on the water heater, unless you just happen to like cold showers. And you'll want to know how to check your fresh water tank level, like how much do you have left in the tank. And finally, we'll close out with some best practices. So that's sort of our roadmap for where we're going. So let's start with a 30,000 foot view of your RV's freshwater plumbing system. And that's this diagram here. Now, before we even get into the how of things, you need to know that there are two ways to use your RV's water system. And there may be times when you can only use it one way, or there may be times when the other way just makes more sense. So we're going to cover both because you need to know both. And generally speaking, you're only going to use it one of these ways at a time. Now, the first way is to use water from your RV's onboard water storage tank. And that will look something like this. When you use your water system this way, the water itself comes from your RV's tank, and the pressure that will push the water around in your plumbing system, that comes from a 12-volt pump that you've got on board. The second way to use your water system is to hook it up to a campground water supply. And you may hear this called city water as well, even when you're far, far away from a city. When you use your water system this way, both the water and the pressure that's going to move it through the plumbing, they both come from a campground water spigot. And then after we get past the pump, or not if you're using city water, the rest of the freshwater plumbing is the same regardless of where the water or the pressure come from. You'll have cold water lines that run to your various fixtures, your sinks, showers, toilets, what have you. One of these lines will also run into your water heater. And then out of the water heater, you'll have additional hot water lines going to those fixtures that need it. So let's say you're headed to a campground and you've read that they've got no hookups, or maybe it's described as electric only. These secret RV code words let you know that there will not be a water spigot to hook up to. So if you want to, flush the toilet, you're going to have to do it with water from your RV's onboard water tank. So how do you fill that up? Well, your RV may have what's called a gravity fill. This is basically just a tube that leads into your RV's freshwater tank with an opening probably to the outside. You just put a hose in the tube, turn it on, and let gravity carry the water into the tank. It's not any more complicated than that. There may also be a port labeled tank fill or power fill or something like that that has a garden hose type connector on it. If you have one of those, then hooking a hose up to that will fill your RV's onboard water tank. Or your RV may have some sort of valves or a control panel on it, similar to this one, which looks to me rather like a control panel from a submarine. In that case, you hook your hose up where indicated and set the valves and levers so that it routes the fresh water into your tank. And on this one, it's not really too hard. There's like a color-coded map of how to set the handles so that it does what you want. So, when you're filling your RV's water tank, how do you know when it's full? Well, there are a few ways. If you're filling up using a gravity fill, water will eventually fill it up and start pouring out the gravity fill back at you. That's a pretty solid clue that your tank is full. Now, RV water tanks also have an overflow tube that will drain excess water out of the tank and onto the ground. So if you're using a power fill option and you see water start to leak onto the ground, don't panic. You haven't busted anything. That's just the overflow tube pouring off the excess water. And of course, you can always check your RV's freshwater gauge as you fill up as well. We'll get to the gauge in a little bit. Okay, so that's filling up the tank. And most campgrounds, even if they don't have hookups, they'll at least have a place where you can fill your tank. So before you head out, check to make sure that they do have a potable water source, or if they don't, maybe fill up at home. All right, you've got water in the tank, but that water is just going to sit there unless you've got some pressure to push it through your pipes. And that's where your water pump comes in. RV water pumps are typically 12-volt devices, and they'll be installed in a closet or a storage compartment somewhere. But the good news is that you don't usually have to physically access your water pump to turn it on. Every RV I have ever seen has a switch somewhere in the living space to turn the water pump on. Now, of course, I can't tell you where that switch is in your RV, but if you've got a collection of switches and control panels on a wall somewhere, that's a good place to start looking. And it should be labeled, and hopefully it's in a convenient place for you. Now, when you turn it on, you will likely hear a little bit of noise, a little pump whirring. That's normal, fear not. See, RV water pumps have pressure switches built in. What this means is that when you turn on the water pump, it will run for a bit to build up pressure in your plumbing system. Then, once your plumbing system is pressurized to the preset level, and that's typically somewhere between 30 and 70 psi, and if you want to know, it should be actually stamped right on your water pump itself. But once it gets up to that pressure, it will activate the pressure switch, and this will stop the pump. So because of that pressure switch, you should only hear the water pump while you're actively calling for water with an open faucet. The rest of the time, the pump really shouldn't be running, even if you've got the power on. So that's using water from your onboard tank. But what about the other way to use your plumbing? City water. So let's say you're headed to a campground or an RV park that's advertised as full hookups, for example. That means you will have a dedicated water spigot right at your campsite, and you can use that to provide both the water itself and the pressure to move the water around. So when you're using city water, you won't be using your water pump. Hooking up to city water is also really easy. It's just garden hose connections on both ends. One end on the spigot and the other end to a port on your RV. Now, just like when filling your fresh water tank, the city fill connection could take several forms. You might have a completely separate port on the outside of your RV that's labeled city water. That's pretty self-explanatory. Your port may be in a storage compartment or right on the outside wall of the RV. It's pretty low tech, not too hard to figure out. So here's another nugget of info. These ports should have check valves on them to ensure that water only flows in and won't slosh back out as you drive around. That's a good thing. And again, depending on your RV, you may have a valve to rotate or a lever to flip to make sure that you're using the city water. This control panel, again, has a setting for city water, and you just follow the color-coded map and you're good to go. And remember, once you're hooked up to city water, that water is already pressurized, so you won't need your water pump. You just use your fixtures on board just like normal. Okay, so you've got water now, either from A, your water tank, or B, from a campground spigot. But if you want hot water, you'll need to know how to turn on your RV's water heater. And that's typically not too hard. Most, but certainly not all, RV water heaters are like little miniature versions of the tank water heater you might have in a house. Typical RV tank capacities are like 6 to 10 gallons, so don't zone out while you're taking a shower. You'll run it out. Now, these tank-style water heaters are either powered by propane or electrical power, and turning them on is usually pretty easy. There will be a switch somewhere inside your RV that powers up the water heater. Now, depending on if your water heater is electric or propane-powered or both, there may be 1 or 2 switches. Flip them on, and your water heater will come to life and start heating the water. So turning on the water heater, that part's easy, but of course, in order for that to actually work, you will need to have an appropriate fuel source available. Either propane from your onboard tanks, and you did remember to open your propane tanks before trying the water heater, right? Or, if it's electric power from a 120 volt shore power connection. And besides the fuel source, you'll want to make sure you've got water in the water heater's tank, please, before turning it on. You don't want to heat them up dry. Once your water heater is on, you may have to wait a little bit before the water in the tank gets up to temperature. How long, I can't say. It just kind of depends on the water heater and your plumbing, but a little bit of pre-planning is definitely a good thing when you're thinking about taking a shower. Just give it some time to heat up. Now these days, more and more RVs, like our own Winnebago Echo, come with tankless water heaters. These don't have traditional water tanks, so they're pretty much ready to go as soon as you turn them on, as long as you've got the fuel and you're flowing water through them. In the case of our Truma AquaGo, that fuel is propane, but there are some models out there that run on diesel fuel as well. The controls for these water heaters will vary with the brand, but again, they're usually co-located with the rest of your RV's switches and control panels. So, while you're looking at control panels, now is a good time to bring up how to check your RV's fresh water tank level. This should also be really easy, as there will be a control panel and a gauge for it, but the style and the ways you read them will vary a little bit from RV to RV. So, step one, find the gauge. Then, there's usually going to be a button that you press to activate it. They're not lit up all the time. And if there are multiple buttons, you just push the one that says fresh. And when you do, the gauge is energized and it'll give you a reading. Now that reading may be in the form of like indicator lights, which light up at like 1/2, 1/4, 3/4 full, what have you. That's pretty self-explanatory. There may be a digital readout like this one, or maybe like this one. And those are also pretty self-explanatory. In any case, the fresh water level will usually be reported to you in terms of a percentage of full. So it's a good idea to find out your RV's freshwater tank capacity, which should be in your owner's manual. See, you need to read it. So find that capacity, and then you can do the little mental math to convert percentages to gallons if you need to know the gallons for some reason. Okay, so that's sort of the nuts and bolts of how you operate your RV's freshwater plumbing. Not super difficult stuff, but practically speaking, what are some do's or don'ts or practical tips that I can give you? Well, the first one has to do with your fresh water hose, and that is to get a good fresh water hose that is either blue or white in color and preferably drinking water safe. The whole RV universe has standardized on either blue or white hoses for fresh water, and as long as you don't try to buck the system, that's a gentle reminder both for you and everyone else that you shouldn't use these hoses to rinse out your sewer hose, for example. The next tip is to remember that water weighs about 8 pounds per gallon, so you will get better gas mileage if you can minimize the amount of extra water you carry around. Like in our Echo, our 50-gallon tank, for example, that'll weigh over 400 pounds when that's topped off. So if your destination has water available, it just kind of makes sense not to carry around an extra 400 pounds that you could get when you got there. But, another tip, I always take at least some water with us, even if our destination has water. Stuff happens, and we may want to flush the toilet or wash our hands along the way, or heaven forbid we get stuck somewhere and have to spend the night out on the road. So we always travel with a little bit of water on board, just not too much. If you're using a gravity fill, it might make sense to get one of these water filly spout thingies to use with the gravity fill. Yes, you could just shove the end of the hose into the gravity fill tube, but did you drag that end of the hose on the ground or something? That's why I go for the little filly spouty thing. And if you're hooking up to campground water or city water, you'll want to invest in a pressure regulator. Sometimes the water pressure at campground water can be really high, and you don't want to blast super high water pressure inside your RV. These are little devices that just go in line between the spigot and your RV, and they take the incoming water pressure and regulate it down to something that's safe for your RV's plumbing. And finally, and I could do a whole seminar on this, but do your best to keep the freshwater system in your RV clean and sanitary. We actually drink from ours, but even if you don't do that or don't want to, you'll probably be washing with it, brushing your teeth, so it just makes good sense to keep things clean. So like, store your water hoses and accessories in a container separate from your sewer hoses. Use a filter on the water coming into your RV. They're not expensive. Don't drag the ends of your hoses through the mud when you're coiling them up, those kinds of things. Basically, anytime you're doing something with your water, just think about your toothbrush and let that be your guide about how you want to treat any of your water connections. So there you go. That's the very basics of your RV's freshwater plumbing system. There's certainly a lot more that you could know, but by now that should be enough so that you could take your RV out for a weekend of camping and you'd be able to use the water, no worries. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll come back for the next topic in the series, where we'll get into everyone's favorite, wastewater plumbing. And who doesn't like to talk about sewage, right? Anyway, that'll do it for now. Goodbye.